Thomas J. Clark.
At the age of 25, under the name Henry Hammond Wilson, he was sentenced at the Old Bailey. Penal servitude for life under the Treason Felony Act. It was the 14th of June, 1883.
Had anyone told me before the prison doors closed upon me that it was possible for any human being to endure what the Irish prisoners have endured in Chatham Prison and come out of it alive and sane, I would not have believed him. Yet some of us have done so, and it has been a source of perpetual surprise to me that I was able to get through it at all.
Chatham, Millbank, Portland, for 15 years.
The mouth, as it were, locked all the time, and only opened by official permission. No matter who the man may be, he will inevitably be driven insane if only kept long enough under that silent system.
One punishment that he did, 21 days bread and water in the penal cells. Well, the penal cells were built in the rock in Portland Prison, and there was neither light nor ventilation. And his food for the 21 days was 8 ounces of dry bread and a pint of cold water. Then he had to take all his clothes off for fear he'd use them for heat, and put them outside the door at night. He wasn't allowed to keep them in the cell.
I got 40 days starvation and solitary confinement in that cell. Talk of hunger and cold. Many a time I was forced to chew the rags I got to clean my tinware in an effort to allay the hunger pains.
I always had a great admiration for anyone, whether it was man or woman, who used their backbone as the Lord intended them to use it to keep their body up straight. I never saw Clark stooped, never. He stood absolutely upright, and he also had, if he shook hands with you, you know, he had long, slender fingers and a kind of worn hand that you loved to clasp. There was nothing flaccid about him, either mentally or physically.
Clench your teeth hard and never say die. Keep your thoughts off yourself all you can. No mooning or brown studies. Guard your self-respect. If you lost that, you'd lose the backbone of your manhood. Keep your eyes wide open and don't bang your head against the wall. These are the golden rules for life for a long-sentence prisoner. If sleep came, I was wakened within an hour by a noise, something like the report of a small cannon being fired close beside me. The officer was inspecting us and had merely banged the heavy iron trapdoor after him. With the same loud noise, the trap would be banged all through the night, at hour intervals. The horror of those nights and days will never leave my memory. One by one, I saw my fellow prisoners break down and go mad under the terrible strain. Some slowly and by degrees, others suddenly and without warning. Who next was the terrible question that haunted us day and night, and the ever-recurring thought that it might be myself.
He survived, and in 1898, release. In one thing only, he was unchanged from the boy who had travelled to Dublin from his home in Dungannon with his friend Tom Kelly 20 years before.
Well, my father and Clark went to the unveiling of the O'Connell Monument. Well, they were there that day anyway, and they were sworn in by John Daly and Michael Davitt to the Fenian brother. My father was about 18, I suppose. Clark was, I think, 3 years older.
John Daly of Limerick had been his fellow prisoner during those terrible years, but was released earlier. Daly's niece, Nora, remembers.
But Tom, Uncle John went to, when Tom was released, he went to meet him and met him at the gates and brought him directly to our house. I was a very small child at the time. I was out for a walk with my sisters, and when I came in I saw this man. Well, he was a skeleton. He really frightened me. He was a skeleton. So he stayed in our house then for some months, and he was down in Kilkee with us for the summer. And I, of course, a child, just be chasing him around, and I'm sure I wasn't wanted very often. But I didn't realise that I was unwanted. But he was supposed to be smoking too much, and I used to hear my elders saying, you see, that he was smoking too much, and I used to be hiding his pipe. And we used to have great fun because he was a hero in my eyes, and I never had any cause to change that. I thought he was an extraordinary man. I felt that Tom couldn't do wrong.
Her sister, Kathleen.
I was disappointed in his appearance. He was very emaciated and apparently in a very bad state of nerves. And a rather funny thing, it sounded funny to me, because when you're young everything is funny. When he sat at the table to dine, he couldn't sit up to a table. He'd been used to sitting up to a block of a tree fastened in the floor as a table, which he couldn't draw near to. And he was the same way with the dining room table. He was the same distance from it. And it took him a long time to get over that, you see. And in that way he was like, not altogether the thing I had visioned in either appearance or manners. But before he left Limerick, I had come back to my original idea of a wonderful man, a lovely character, strong and honest, straight as a die. And I never had reason to change that.
She became engaged to him before he left again for America. But first, a return to Dungannon, her first visit in 20 years.
I remember it well. It's 1899 when we came to Dungannon, and it was a big night, and all the houses in the nationalist part of the town were lighted up. There was a big reception for him. I remember when it was on the Ann Street, and I was up there with my mother. I was only about 6 or 7 years of age at the time. He called down the next morning, I think, the next day, to see it was all, and he was in the house with my mother and father and all that day. My mother asked him, I can't remember what she asked him, but she asked him what he was now or something like that. He said he was what he was always, a Fenian.
And in America, where he married Kathleen Daly, he went back to work, this time with the old Fenian John Devoy on his paper, The Gaelic American.
John Devoy was very dour when you met him first. At least that's the impression one got. Well, when you got to know him afterwards, I found that dourness was really a cover for a very intense shyness. But when you got to know him, he was a really lovable character. It took time.
Devoy sent Clark back to Ireland in 1907 to organise. He settled in Dublin and started in business as a tobacconist.
Well, when he opened his tobacco shop, you see, he'd been in touch before coming over with the Republican group in the north. And he got Bulmer Hobson invited out to address a clan meeting there. And he was in touch with them all the time after that. Well, when he came home and took the first shop in Amen Street, I wasn't with him, I was down in Limerick at the time. He was in that shop from 9 in the morning till 11 at night. And Sean McDermott and the other men used to come in, and it was to settle all their business in the shop. And that was the start of the walk towards the revolution.
He was co-opted onto the Supreme Council of the IRB, whose president was afterwards Dennis McCullough.
It was Clark's personality that gave us standing. At that time, those of us who were trying to G up the IRB weren't making much headway because we weren't ourselves of any importance. We had no background. But when Tom Clark came, nobody could accuse us of being fruitless people. Tom Clark added weight and power and dignity to the movement. And with Tom Clark's advent came a kind of a positive forward movement. And I attribute it all to him, onto Tom Clark's unbending attitude and his devotedness to the ideal of an Irish Republic.
Leslie Price, a member of Common the Mon.
If you had to go to him, well, I never had to go to him in the social sense, only to go to him with messages from some other leaders or some others. But if he talked to you at all, he always put you on the same basis as himself. No matter how stupid or idiotic you were to your own mind, he always talked with you as if you were just on his own level. And that was a wonderful thing in him, because from the young he drew out the very best that was in them. And I remember it also struck me very forcibly in the General Post Office in 1916. That same thing came into being.
He was the main link between John Devoy and the IRB in Ireland. They corresponded regularly. Clark's style was vivid and direct.
There's an old bags over here at present from Providence, Rhode Island. Name, Gibbons. Tell my friend J.L. that if he has any more in that town of this kind, will he for God's own sake keep them at home or put them into some high-walled lunatic asylum?
Stil runter jedoch. Nirv al skele ach gehandelt. Leer mo brien.
When you're the Jane Major at the Mass, a bullish axe shopper, Pishana Gone. I guess when you haka Stach, so shopper, I guess we can hear Hahir. I guess, you know, shall leave because the green was a guy. In the Hima shop, I think, and then dream making a guy. The United States Tahiga, I went here stole. In Sna, Kilini, Shen in Sna, free zone. I guess, saying a Hilish, in Femmer, Hilach, the cliché. You're a Shekantach, the Watsman a corner, had a kind. They got a shacks that would really hope in etiquette that you can have sovereigns. So they, I guess, got more on the lager. Een scale of one, een skill in green of one, a hula me way or one, no the a later we trail Higgertigus Bulger. We's the coach in it, no a serial Higgertigus Bulger. Say so that I could come to her state that they need it. Well, we in Edison Glinder and Lashing, Honeywood and us on the goat. I guess a Chaka Jacos, and here, even Nick Michel got a Chaka Goji. I guess not a row can't have a veer and Fisher Cornell on Linster. Idger Delir Street, I guess Hawkins Street. Because she's machine on Fulligan Jimor and Shanish, the Linster market. We are Sheelam. I guess we Chakos and Shin was going to Tashimianish. I then was Steen Shin, I guess Jinish scale for an oil og Chach America. Agus a cháide fanach leis nuair a bhuailite chosar